Hello, everybody. My name is Sean Hendricks. Welcome to the next in our series of expert challenges that we're doing live. We've just finished off Mudbox and 3ds Max, so we're now going into the Maya challenge at this point. So first off, I'm just going to set a few ground rules before I introduce everyone here. See, now I'm on the third one. I've got the flow down right, so it's the first two are great dry runs, and for the rest of the day, we should have them nailed.
Get it by the end of the day.
By the one we do at 1 a.m., I should have this down. So just a few basic ground rules. First off is, as will probably be mentioned in the chat window, please be civil to everyone in there. No tearing anyone a new one on the chat. We'd appreciate that. There's someone with a ban button ready for people that are really, really cruel. Also, we get these questions all the time. We actually allowed you all to submit questions ahead of time into this system, and a huge number of those questions are always the same ones, which is asking about the future of our products in very specific detail. What are you doing with X loved feature or Y loved feature? And as a general rule, we really can't answer those things. And I know this is not an answer you want to hear. In many cases, it's not even an answer we want to say. But the reality is there are rules and regulations for a public company on how they put out information, and we cannot put the information out ahead of time. It cannot be done. So FYI, if you're asking a lot of those questions, there's a good chance we'll probably be ignoring them in the chat or calling them up just to say we can't tell you. So just so you know. So at this point, I'd just like to introduce a few of the people that are around us here. Most of these faces you'll have run into at trade shows, you'll see in various other locations. So first we have Chris Viano. Chris is Director of Product Development for Maya. Yeah. And we also have Trevor Adams, who's on the dev side of things. We also have Daryl Obert, who many of you will recognize from stages past at various trade shows and events. He's also one of the guys that makes our feature videos for Maya. And we have Craig Barr beside him, who you'll recognize from all the exact same places as you'll recognize Daryl, who also makes a lot of our feature videos for Maya and Mudbox. So this is the group that will be answering your questions today. And as I said, we had a bunch of questions sent in earlier, so as I know, people take a little while to warm up in the chat sessions. As I look here, I think there's quite a number of you in there who are all sitting quietly trying to think of what they're going to ask. So we'll start with some of the questions that were earlier submitted. And we have a few kind of technical ones that we'll start off with. So I'm going to throw this first one over to Daryl here, which is, what is the difference between render layers and render passes? Why should I use either?
Well, they both do similar things. They allow to segment your scene at various different levels. Render layers has the ability to do it at the object level. So you're basically putting objects inside of the layers, inside of Maya, and they live right down here in the render tab. And for the objects that are added to these layers, you can make render layer override. So basically you can change any attribute on the objects that exist at the render layer level. So you're essentially doing it at the object level. Render passes happen at the shader language level. So this is something that Mental Ray has the ability to do. During the render process, it will basically render a primary buffer. And inside of that primary buffer, it has the ability to extract all the different lighting components. So specular, diffuse, utility things like vectors and things like that can all be extracted at the render time and output to different files. So at the end of the day, they're both doing segmentation of your files to make multiple images. It's just sort of one happens at the object level and one of them happens at the shader level. The one that happens at the shader level has the advantage of not really impacting the overall speed. The disadvantage is it's not quite as flexible as the render layer level. So the render layer levels, you could say, I want this object to have a different shader on it for this layer versus the next layer. Or I want this object to not be visible in reflections for this layer, but maybe they are for the next layer. So it's a little more flexible, but each individual render layer that you make has to be rerun through the rendering engine. Therefore, it takes a bit of time. So they do similar things, just sort of at a different level or granularity.
Perfect. Now, one of the questions.
You use them both. Basically, if you're segmenting your scene, you're gonna end up using them both.
Now, one of the questions we've got from Matt online right now is, could you explain how tech gets shared across products such as 3ds Max and Maya? So, yep, it's just up and running.
It's up and running?
It's up and running.
Good. So there's actually a lot of technology that's already shared between things like Max and Maya, things like boring things like licensing and FBX libraries and a lot of things. Actually, the base technology of both viewports is a graphic system called One Graphic System, or OGS, which is a component that's shared across Autodesk. There are libraries that we share, like Substance. So a lot of times, and the newest one in 3ds Max that's a shared technology is Python. So we, Eddie, who's the new product manager of Max, we have meetings. There's technology that if it makes sense to share in both places. That's what we do. And in some cases, I guess the more complicated things are things like UI, things like ways things have worked for a long time, where that's a little bit more complicated. But
Yeah, there's conventions.
there's
that have already been there.
conventions, Y up, Z up. Those are
The common one.
common ones. But I think in general, there's a big effort between the groups that if we are going to do something, and we build new technology, like we demoed Bifrost at SIGGRAPH, we attempted to try to say it was an open technology, and it wasn't perceived that way, but we've tried to make it clear that Bifrost is a technology that was designed from the ground up to be shareable, and that's how we're trying to design most of our new technology now.
Perfect. Now, one of the questions that I've got here is, we're getting real into the details. These guys go right into the techie stuff right off the top. So one of the questions here is, I have 2 questions regarding some workflows between Max and Maya. So we'll see if we can tackle this. We don't have any of the Max experts in the room at the moment for this stuff, but the question here is, how can we pass end particles simulated with Maya to Max? And is there a predictable way to pass Maya fluid voxel information to particles and maintain those particles under control following the actual fluid and not going out of control? So 2 separate questions.
2 separate questions. So to get particles over to Max, you can create a cache, and then that cache would carry them across. So come across just as points, obviously, in space, and then you'd have to handle the shading on the Max side. To get the voxel information out, there's a few things. If you wanted to get it to Max, I think you'd have to surface it, because Maya has the ability to create kind of an ISO surface from that. A lot of the voxel information can be carried over into that piece of geometry at a color per vertex level. So
I think actually he's not even asking about getting it out as so much as is there a predictable way to pass Maya fluid voxel information to Maya particles?
Yeah, so if you want the fluids to move particles around, turn down the inherence value. The inherence value, it's set to 1, and that's why they sort of escape the fluid shape. If you crank that inherence value down, the particles will kind of follow the shape of what the fluid sim is actually doing. So there's a couple of examples in the visor, actually. There's like an kind of airfoil one that's got fluids pushing particles, and if you just open that up and dig into it, you'd see that the inherence value is the key to getting those particles not to sort of explode and go flying off into space from the push that voxel field does from the fluids. I think that's what they were asking.
Yep.
I'm not sure.
Yes, he just corrected that he was looking for it inside of Maya, so we're good there.
Okay, excellent.
So one of the questions we received earlier was that I've seen some improvements in the Maya modeling in the last release. Is this a temporary focus, or is there a longer-term plan for modeling tools? So
Introduce what you do, Trevor.
Yes, that's a good question. So I'm Trevor Adams. I'm the product designer on the modeling side, so I focus exclusively on modeling and UVs. Yes, presumably. And so
focus, you're out of a job. Is that what
pretty much that's what we're saying. Yeah. So I mean, we assembled a modeling team about a year and a half ago, I think is about right. So that's one of the main reasons why you're starting to see modeling improvements in Maya, is that we actually have a devoted team, as opposed to before we had a lot of focus in animation and other parts of Maya. We decided to take a really strong approach with 2014 and beyond to attack a lot of the problems that we've had with modeling, a lot of legacy issues. And you can see on the small annoying things forum and the ideas for Maya forum, a lot of popular things come up, like make Booleans work, for instance. That was like 280 votes or something like that. So it was obvious to us that once we assembled this team, we needed to attack a lot of the obvious problems first before, getting into some more innovative things, and definitely stuff we want to be getting into in the near future. We want to fix all the main problems. So one big thing that we had to do was, take a big step as opposed to little incremental fixes along the way. So we acquired the Next plugin, and we also acquired the rights to work with these guys that developed the Next plugin, which we still are working with them, and they're great guys, very, very intelligent, have a really good approach to things. They want to improve user experience in modeling and not just focus on features. So I share that same intent. So yeah, that's why you're seeing a lot of focus on modeling now, and we wanted this modeling toolkit to give us a good leap forward so that we can start getting into a lot more interesting stuff. But along with that, fix things like bevel and Boolean. And Boolean, you're going to see. You've already seen that in the 2014 extension release, but other common problems we're currently working on in development at this point.
Now, Matt also asked a question online here, and you'll forgive us as we try and figure out these very short, sometimes cryptic sentences and what the question actually is. This question here is volume shader filling a geometric object? Question mark. Also procedural shading for instance geometry that use something like the shader for particles.
Okay, so the volume shader one, we did change. Well, actually, I'm not sure if this is what he's asking, but you now have the ability to have the fluid shape emit from a piece of geometry. We've always been able to do that, but now you have the ability to have it fill that volume and have it be filled at frame 1. It was a new option that was in the SAP or the extension release. I believe it was in the extension release. It might have been 2014 or the extension release, but within the last year, we added the ability to have that fluid shape, the emitter geo kind of piece of geometry of that emitter be filled at frame 1, and also had the ability to have it not, so you don't have to do a run up basically. You just create the piece of geometry. At frame 1, it's already going to be filled, which was really great. And we also added a flag where you could say emit for frame 1 only. So it would sort of be there, the density would be inside that shape, and then it wouldn't just keep spitting density in. So a couple little flags were added to the fluid node. Might have been extension release. It was NAB that I demoed it, so I don't remember what release that was, but we did show that at NAB.
That's one thing you learn about my team. We only remember when features come out based on an event we were at, not based on a feature number.
Yeah, and the second question, I'm not sure that I fully understand, so I might not have a good answer for that.
Yeah,
I'm
that
sorry
one.
about that one.
Oh, here we go. No, like a no atmospheric type volume shader, like an atmospheric type shader.
Yeah, so if you want to do atmospheres, honestly, put a fluid node in there that's not dynamically driven. Just take a big fluid node, put it in there. It'll do a really nice job. And there's also there's atmosphere in the sun sky system that you can link in and have that affect your shader. So right by default, it doesn't do it. But there's, I think on my blog, or if I haven't done it on my blog, I'll go ahead and post a link on there how to get that atmosphere to from the sun sky system to actually contribute to the shading model. There's a little switch that little hack you need to do to make it work. But the best way to get kind of an atmospheric effect, I think, is probably just use a fluid node, a big fluid node that covers your scene up, and don't dynamically generate fluids in it. Don't dynamically add density to it. Just use kind of a procedural texture to create that fluid. It's pretty straightforward. I'd say look at the fluid node for that.
All right. I'd love to see some more functionality in the particle instancer. How hard is it to pass RGB PP to the instanced geometry?
Yeah, we would all love to see the instancer and the the ability to query that information be passed, and then it's definitely something that I'm keen on. I don't have an easy answer for that. Duncan probably has some crazy black magic hack.
As Duncan often does.
Duncan would, I'm sure, be able to answer that with some unique solution, but out of the box, it's not something that's an easily achievable effect.
There we go. So one of the other questions here, following back on the modeling that we received earlier, was the modeling toolkit feels like a plugin. Are there plans to better integrate these features?
Another great point. It feels like a plugin because it is a plugin. You can look in the plugin manager and you can turn it on and off if you wanted to. And the reason why it's a plugin is, again, that we acquired that next plugin. We renamed it to the modeling toolkit. We acquired that sometime in September, October of last year, and so instead of waiting a full release cycle to have a fully integrated solution with that technology, we decided let's do this in phases. So we started with integrating the plugin at a high level. There was a next menu that we removed, make the UI look a little bit more like a Maya UI. And do a few tweaks along the way and some fixes that the deraster guys, the guys responsible for the next plugin, wanted to get done in the plugin, had the opportunity to do so. So that was our 2014 release. The extension, we expanded on that. We did a lot of the stuff with the retopology workflow. We added a lot of functionality to the Quadra tool. So that was kind of like a Quadra 2.0 release for us for the extension. But when we talk about integrating the plugin, that's something that we're heavily invested in right now. So I would say stay tuned for that. Our intention is definitely to remove this, this redundancy that you're seeing in Maya right now, where you have a tool that's in Maya and a select tool that's in the toolkit, and double transform tools. I have to put myself as a designer in the shoes of our users, and I don't like the fact that you have to think between contexts like that, especially while you're trying to do something that needs a lot of flow, like modeling. So it's definitely in our hearts to get that fully integrated. So I would just say stay tuned, and there's more to come.
Now, one of the questions we got from Juan is, do you plan to include shader translation in the one-click workflow between packages? I mean, to translate mental ray MIA material or MIA material X from Maya to A&D material in Max. Anyone have any ability to take a shot at?
I can say that I would appreciate that. That would be nice.
So yeah, duly noted.
Duly noted, yes.
But yes, not in this exact moment that we're speaking.
No, there we go.
Yeah.
I'd like the DX11 shader also.
Yes.
This is Daryl's moment to get on record everything he wants. He's also bribed many people that are online right now to ask the questions so he can then reaffirm them. Is there an option that I could turn on multi-threading when doing a simulation in NCloth?
It should be threaded. There's an option to adjust the number of threads. I think it's thread-n or something like that inside of Maya to cap down the number of threads, but NCloth should be, I'm pretty sure NCloth is threaded. It might not be, it might not scale very well across the processor, so what you get out of a second thread or a third thread, a lot of math doesn't thread elegantly. Like even though a lot of times when they're thinking about threading, they'll go back and look at something and they'll realize that the threading is going to give them a 10% improvement, but just optimizing the algorithm is going to give them a 30% improvement. So threading's not always the answer. So yeah. I know they look at that a lot with the end stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that's a key thing, which is multi-threading was a big, and also like 64-bit and all these things. People thought it was a big thing, or 12 gigabytes of TRAM, and that's great. And then you have to load up.
Yeah.
You have to fill all that space, and then if you're waiting 8 minutes to get to a point. Sometimes it's there's more elegant solutions to making things fast than threading or a lot of RAM.
Yes, I know we've seen it in, I think, all of our products at one point or another, where we've we finally put in multi-threading and we've got an 8% speed improvement. And technically it was originally even a bigger speed improvement, but then all the stuff you do under the hood to make the threading happen sucks up clock cycles, and it kind of all scales back down again. It's not like rendering where you say, this core you work on that frame, this core you work on that frame. It can get a little more dicey, especially if you're taking math that wasn't designed right from the get-go to be multi-threaded in the first place. So we have, of course, a bunch of questions. I'm guessing one person probably sent in a whole raft of these things, so we'll maybe start with a couple of them and go back and forth through them as people ask questions online in real time. Obviously, one of the big things was XGen that's come out in the last little while. What does XGen bring to the table that we couldn't previously do in Maya?
I can take that, or Chris could take that. Either.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, obviously in Maya we've had solutions to problems. People are getting their images out. So, XGen, what it does is it brings scalability. If you're trying to make massive scenes that have a ton of geometry, that's what XGen is going to bring to the table. So it sort of does two things. It does, obviously, hair and fur, as well as sort of populating scenes with geometry. So it's an arbitrary instancer, essentially. So either we're instancing splines for hair, or we're instancing geometry. And the thing that's kind of cool about it is, when it's instancing geometry, that geometry is loaded at render time. So it's basically saving out archive files, either Mental Ray archive files or RenderMan archive files or Arnold archive files that get loaded dynamically at render time. So if you're doing something that's sort of not high count of instances, it's not going to bring it to the table. But if you're trying to do something that's just massive, on the scale of like what Disney does with their films, where it's thousands and thousands or millions of objects, that's where XGen sort of just keeps going. It's definitely not the fastest system to work with for the low poly count stuff or the low instance number stuff. But if you need it to just never give up and keep going and scaling and scaling and scaling, that's where XGen really differentiates itself from the other things that we can do inside of Maya.
And XGen is also hooked into NHair. So you can take the splines that you draw out on the surface, and you can basically pass that to nucleus. That could be done for grass. It could be done for hair. I mean, the big thing for us with XGen was that it was built in production over the last 10 years at Disney, and it was at Pixar, it was at IMD, and they just beat the crap out of it, you know. And when you beat the crap out of something for that long in production, and you have options upon options, it's such a deep package that it's already out in the wild with the extension. We have people in production, and there's people that are, you know, it's kind of like a big, deep hole in the sense that there's so many things that it can do that, you know, what we really encourage everyone to do is just, you know, take the tutorials, get over the initial fear of it, and then, because it's a great package for when you're in that 80% and you're stuck. We're pretty confident that last 20% is somewhere. It might not be obvious, the button to click, and even, you know, Daryl and I, we talking, you know, even we're discovering parts of XGen over time, but it's definitely worth the investment if you want to be able to do hair and fur for sure. Feathers is another one. Roof tiles. I mean, you can go through.
Anything that's arbitrary that you want to instance in, that you want to have, you know, the ability to modify it using expressions or using maps. It's very extensible. You don't get painted into a hole with it.
Yeah.
It did take me a little bit of time before it clicked, and I was like, okay, I get it. This is why I would go this direction instead of using, you know, classic hair inside of Maya or classic fur inside of Maya or paint effects to do terrain population or something like that. It definitely took that, you know, you had to get over that initial sort of, well, this is a little different. But once you see what it you know, when it saves you that one time and you're like, oh, I didn't paint myself into a hole with this, that's when it sort of clicked and we're like, oh, okay, I see.
And there are a lot of instancing systems out there, or you see it in games. The thing about this that was really compelling to us was how, once you get it as an artist, how art directable it is. And that's kind of what Disney was really going into, was saying, I want to be able to instance all this geometry, but then still have control over individual instances, still have control over large properties. And that's really where it kind of shines, is that the artist, if he gets direction, which he always or she always will, it feels like, again, kind of going through it, that there's a lot of things that will save you because when you procedurally generate something, you kind of give up a little bit of control. And this is a great system that kind of layers on top that artist control to be able to do that.
So one of the questions that just came in online about XGen was, can we create animated crowds using XGen?
You can, so here, it has the ability to move geometry in a couple different ways. You can use some of the built-in, like if you go into the XGen window, you can use some of the built-in parameters in XGen to modify things. So inside of these modifiers, you can basically start adding in different types of little simulations. So if you wanted to have a little bit of wave going through it or something like that, yes, you could use in-hair to drive the guide curves that ultimately drive the instance geometry, or you could just use some little procedural kind of built-in code that XGen has sort of through this modifier window. The other thing that you can do with it, if you wanted to do sort of a semi-crowd type effect, I wouldn't say for crowds necessarily, but like you wanted to have wind blow across. Where it's going to avoid things and stuff like that. But if you wanted to have a bunch of different random moving objects, the archives, when you create them, they're basically making Olympic caches. And those Olympic caches, if you have animation on that, will save out. So if you had an Olympic cache of a tree blown in the wind, you wouldn't have to use these modifiers to make that tree blow in the wind. You could animate the tree, create your Olympic cache, which becomes your archive essentially, and then have that be what gets populated and instanced throughout your scene. And then obviously, you know, you can layer on top of that another set of modified animation that kind of comes through with these modifiers. So for a crowd, I wouldn't say that would be the best choice, but you can get animation onto that instance geometry, either using Maya's dynamic system to change the guides, using these modifiers to sort of use expressions and procedural effects to warp that kind of geometry.
Crowds of trees.
Well, crowds of trees, or baking the animation out into the Olympic file.
And I'm kind of picturing you could also use it in kind of the instance that I've seen many times in film where it's a crowd. It's not a crowd doing anything specific. They're just kind of, it's like if you saw 10,000 people sitting on a beach.
Sure.
So you could have, 30 or 40 little Olympic caches that are randomized through them, and they kind of just, you're not going to look close at anything.
Yeah.
So you could use it for kind of that down and dirty version of a crowd.
Yeah, and if if you had someone walking through the grass, you could use the sphere force on the feet to make the grass push out of the way, so that the instance geometry is getting affected by the real hero character in the scene. So there's a lot of ways to get stuff moving in XGen.
And
I guess
that's
is
the key is that a lot of times with these kind of big things, you can say, oh yeah, simulation and crap. I mean, a lot of times, it's
You don't want that.
what you want is you want the artist control, right? So this is a great system. There's been a lot of talk on different forums. Oh, what is this? And I can do this in this package or whatever. And this is it's a different approach to the same problem. And again, things that come out of production tend to be very practical and pragmatic. And what we've seen out of this is a system that, again, like the example of proceduralism or things like that, sometimes it being down and dirty is more than enough to sell the shot, right?
I can't think of the number of times I've gone into a film house or a VFX shop and you're like, oh, what kind of simulator did you use? Oh, well, we just kind of painted some stuff and put some 2D cards in and just blasted it out. It's like that's often when you're on the crunch, that's the answer because you can tweak it to the nth degree without resolve. All right, so kind of quiet right now on the live questions, so I'm going to jump in here. Oh, wait. How far away are we from being able to simulate fluid containers over multiple render nodes? Where do you go with that question?
Oh, that's okay. So multiple CPU nodes.
I'm assuming that's what their meaning is, or possibly for entire
If
computers.
if yes, type yes.
You'll have to wait a minute and a half
Yeah,
for that
okay.
yes to come out because
So
of the
that's it.
delay.
So yes. So we're gonna get the answer.
Give both answers.
We're gonna get both answers. Yeah. So yeah. So I think I'm going to go with multiple CPUs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think again, we showed Bifrost at SIGGRAPH, and the idea of Bifrost was to be able to create grids of objects and be able to offer an adaptive solution where there was detail only where you wanted it, and in that it lends itself. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's a solved problem because there have been a lot of attempts to do just this, but it lends itself to the fact that you could take those boxes in the grid and farm those out over multiple places. I can tell you there are smart people thinking about it, but it's certainly not an easy problem.
Well, this lends us right back to the multi-threading question in every way, shape, and form.
Yeah, no. Then there's multi-threading, and then there's multiple CPUs is one issue, and then multiple machines is a greater problem when you're trying to, because then your memory between multiple machines and networking and stuff. So multiple CPUs is an easier problem. They're looking at that.
Yeah, he agreed. He was looking for multiple CPUs.
But
Or over the whole farm. So he wanted both. He wants the world.
So yeah, so I would say that there's definitely people looking at that problem, and the difference also again with fluids and things like that is the boundaries, right? So if you solve certain things, it's not about it's about how you bring it back together and the math working between for example, the boundaries of all these different grids. So that's where the math problem is the idea of they can break the problem up. Can they get the answer and bring it back together in a way that actually makes it look like smoke or whatever? So that's essentially the challenge.
Smoke with a bunch of stitched lines in the middle of it.
Yes, and you can So if you go on the SIGGRAPH papers, there's a lot of people thinking about it, but really, has anyone solved it to a point where an artist is bought off on it, and do you get the speed improvements at the same time? Right. The answer is no.
So another question we have here from Vladimir is there a level of detail for particles like to be able to reduce viewport particles?
Actually, yeah, there is. Yeah, well,
I like it when we can just say, yeah, there is.
You know what? Actually, what you can clamp the number of particles in a particle object, but it doesn't reduce the number that you see. So it's not like for every 10th particle, show me the 10th particle, but you can say, in this particle system, I only want 5,000 particles. So unfortunately, the maximum. I don't think there's a way to call and say, show me every 10th particle.
Gotcha.
Which is probably what he's looking for.
Yeah. How about what are the advantages of the new joint tool in Maya?
Greg, you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, we've added a couple things in there. As of with 2014, we have a couple of options with the joint tool. That I don't know if we have a good animation demo. Do you have a guy, maybe Dave or something, you can bring up there? Maybe.
Keep talking, and I'll look for something that's.
Yeah. So.
Oh, here we can just create some joints.
There we go.
While you talk, I'll create some joints here.
So it's a lot easier to work with joints, whereas in the past you would create a joint, you'd have your weighting, and you were kind of stuck to that. If you had weighted your joints, now we have the ability to easily, quickly, essentially untether that and be able to move the pivot point of that, or be able to slide that around without necessarily disturbing your weighting. Maybe we should put Daryl's screen is up. Good.
Yeah. So one of the things that we added to the joint tool is the ability to mirror. So you can now mirror across this given axis. And the other thing that we added to the joint tool, other than the mirroring, is the ability to, like Craig was saying, to easily change the pivot, not have it update the skin,
Manipulate underneath
the skin. So there's been a couple things here.
But yeah, I mean, and also I guess speed improvements in as far as what Daryl was saying there, and placing your joints, right? Just by simply turning on mirroring and just doing one side of a character, or if you have multiple limbs on a character, that you can quickly place the joints and have those easily mirrored and be able to edit across as you're producing or building your skeleton.
Yeah, and another thing, unfortunately, with this scene, I don't have any geometry here, but the project to center is really great.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, so the project to center allows you to basically start dropping down joints maybe in the top view, and it would automatically find the center of the volume of the geometry that you're dropping on top of, and make it kind of snap to that object automatically. So it makes adding joints in really, really quickly. If you give me a second, I'll pull up a file, and we'll come back. We'll circle back to that. Give me a second to find a file of a character, and we'll circle back to that one.
All right, let's see what we've got here. People, keep the questions coming. I'm going back to our earlier submitted questions. So when we were talking about the modeling questions, it looks like the same person sent in the addendum to that question, which was, if we're doing all this extra work in modeling, does that mean the focus on animation tools has faded? You can't win.
Love all our children equally. So I think on the animation side, there's definitely the same effort going into understanding, what are the base things versus the shiny new things. So I Trevor knows that I call this the broccoli of features. It's not necessarily the stuff engineers want to work on, because sometimes maybe it's revisiting code that is not necessarily new,
something
or
someone wrote 10 years ago. And
sure. So yeah. So I think with animation, what you've seen, there's two big efforts that we're looking at. We're looking at performance, because that's something that everybody always wants, and at the same time, there's a big effort going into understanding what are the base things that we need to revisit versus, again, shiny new things that maybe people say, I want this, and we can look at it. So there has been a new product manager, Warren Trevisan, and Warren spent 15 years at Pixar before joining us, and Warren is currently right now on the road. He's right now in Montreal visiting customers as we speak, talking about those kind of things. So again, if anyone on these forums wants to reach out to us, to either visit this forum or directly through the area is another great place where we watch for feedback. We'd love to hear from you guys about the thoughts of what's the broccoli that we need to eat for animation, so that this question goes away. Meaning that there's no doubt that we're strongly invested in animation, because arguably, that's the core of Maya, is its animation tool set.
All right.
Stuff. So bear with me.
Give you a little more time.
Give me a little more time.
So some of the other questions that have come in, and what are the advantages of the new unified sampling?
Ease of use.
I like the simple answers.
Yeah, it just makes it easier. So you're not trying to balance all this. Like, say you have a bunch of area lights, and in area lights you used to adjust the quality of the area light if it was a mental area light in the actual area light, and then you'd be adjusting the edge anti-aliasing in the render settings. With unified sampling, it's a quality slider. I want it to be fast, I want it to be slow. It adjusts the sampling across all the lighting components, as well as the kind of edge and texture filtering components all at once. So it's
one setting for all edge control for all intents and purposes.
Ease of use. All right, let's see if this actually works here.
Nope.
We have here.
Here we go. Pull Daryl back up on screen.
Can't make any promises.
Our poor camera guy is being forced to go back and forth.
What we have
like
now is I've got a
it.
character here. I've got a two-up view happening. I've got project to center turned on. We'll turn that project to center on, and I'll start dropping these joints down And as I'm dropping these joints down here, you can see that it's actually finding the volume of that character. So instead of dropping down on the origin down here, where it would have if I was normally drawn in the top view, it tried to find the center of that volume of that character and sort of drop it down correctly. So you can see that that joint's now going down the center of that. So projector center with the mirroring, and the mirroring is kind of live. So as you start to maybe go back and change the edit of where that pivot might be, that mirror connection is maintained as you start to adjust where those joints are on both sides of your character if you have it turned on. So those two things combined make laying out characters much, much faster. You can see I can really start to go in here and add in those fingers, and as I'm drawing that in the perspective view, they're in the middle of that finger. So that would be something that it's just a lot more difficult to do. So if you need to get your joints in the character really quickly now, and that project to center isn't just for joints. It's actually a snapping type in the actual menu bar, so you can use that with other things, which is pretty cool.
So mental note, Craig, you might want to wiggle your cable. Apparently we just lost your computer to the system. But continuing along, one of the questions here, which I think is a good one, because I think there's been a fair bit of excitement / confusion around Open Subdiv. So the question is Open Subdiv already implemented in the current version of Maya? And I think, this is one that a lot of people get confused about, because they saw all the videos we did with Pixar earlier in the year and all this great stuff. And then there's some of it we're like, well, you already have it. And then there's other stuff that's like, no, you don't. So where is that actually sitting?
So what we showed, obviously Pixar released Open Subdiv quite a while ago, and we've been working with them for the last couple of years on that. So what we showed at SIGGRAPH was their internal build. They had an internal Maya plugin that that they worked on for their internal purposes, right? So that's what we showed. We're actively working on putting that into Maya, and I think the mantra that we want to have is that you don't know that Open Subdiv's in Maya. So what we showed, or what they've showed, is a viewport plugin. It's kind of enabled through switches and things like that, and it didn't work with all the basic Maya functionality. This is a really amazing library. It enables the speed. It enables all sorts of things. So our mantra, and Trevor he's nodding, so that's a good thing. Yeah. So is that we don't, when it's in Maya, if it's in Maya, these are obviously all the statements that we have to make. We want it to be like it's a native implementation, so that it's not noticed. Same workflow that you had in previous versions is there. It's just better, faster, gooder. Yeah.
We all want gooder.
Yeah.
So I have someone here, Tyros, asking, cool, is this really live? Yes, Tyros, it is really live. Or as live as online the internet can be, because you're going to hear this about a minute and a half after I said it. So don't expect a direct conversation. Okay, other questions we've got here. Has there been any talk on integrating Maya into After Effects workflows similar with Maxon?
So Maxon, the Cinema 4D integration it's a light version of Cinema 4D integrated through a new API that Adobe put out. So we don't have plans to integrate through that API. We've talked to Adobe about things like FBX, workflows that we can do with them. So we have a great relationship with those guys. My old boss he used to work at Autodesk. Bill Roberts is over there. So we have a great relationship with them, and we're trying to work through the standards. We think standards are a better way to work, things like Alembic, things like FBX, as opposed to doing custom integrations where it's a point-to-point. We'd rather focus on standards to do workflows.
And of course, we've got someone who's obviously trying to create a flame war inside of our thing by saying, what do you think? What is the best tool for car modeling, 3S Max or Maya? Dude, don't even go there.
Alias Auto Studio.
Yeah, Alias Auto Studio would be the best tool for that, yes.
Yeah, if you're looking at Ford or GM or Alias Auto Studio.
Or Kia or Lamborghini or Ferrari.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Porsche.
Yeah.
If you're actually making a real car, I would recommend.
Wasn't specific.
He wasn't
If you're
specific.
making a real car, it's Alias Auto Studio.
That's the way to go. And then you can take that data into anything you want. All right. I'd like to see ice-like compounds in the node editor. Is that coming? Well, this kind of falls back into that we can't tell you a lot about the future kind of thing. I don't know if anyone wants to make any really nebulous comments.
Well, I'd say that's a good... I don't think anyone disagrees with that statement. Yeah.
About Naiad. How far ahead to finish the implementation inside of Maya?
Wow, it's really. It makes up for this morning when I wasn't getting many questions. So we showed Bifrost at SIGGRAPH. There's a video on the area. We had a great article with the effects guide guys that you can go on. Maybe someone can post the article if they've read it. It's a great article talking about our intents, talking about why we're not putting Naiad in Maya, because it's more than that, and what our intentions are. So if you want to know what we're trying to do, I would read the effects guide article and watch the video from SIGGRAPH, because again, we're trying to do more than just Naiad in Maya, and that's why it's taken us a long time from the point that we acquired the company. So we're trying something that's not easy. We're trying something that's never been done before, so be patient. But if you want to know what we're trying to do and why it's not obviously ready yet, definitely check out the article and effects guide and the area video that we put up from SIGGRAPH.
Perfect. Now, going back to the questions that have been submitted earlier, we got a question, and this is, I guess, more of a judgment question, but the question was, I'm going to try and teach Maya at the middle school level, 7th and 8th grade. Do you think this can be done? Now, I'm going to throw a few things out there just as comment. One is actually Autodesk has an education group that actually works on developing curriculum to help, and I believe it's actually, don't quote me on it until you look it up, but I believe it's actually aimed at the middle school to high school levels. And it's not so much about teaching people how to use Maya or 3ds Max and other products, but it's about providing curriculum that allow the students to use our 3D tools to investigate things like physics and to investigate science and things like that. So it's actually kind of a two-tiered approach. So if you're actually a teacher at an educational institution, it would probably be well worth your while looking into it to see if that might be something that'll solve what you're trying to do. From the point of view of can they actually learn Maya, it's like I suspect they'll learn it far faster than any of us in this room ever would.
Yeah, I mean, in grade school, hammering out the basics into Maya, grade 7 and 8, absolutely, without issue. They can pick up the basics in modeling and animation very easily, and like Sean said, probably quicker than a lot of adults can, that's for sure. A lot of smart kids out there. So I would see absolutely zero issue, even with starting, aside from what Sean had mentioned for the specific areas of teaching, even teaching Maya and as an intro to all the different fields you can go to within all the other industries out there that a 3D package like Maya brings. I think kids of all different ages can pick up the basics very simply. And we also have online, aside from the educational group that does some amazing job at putting together packages for schools and things like that, we have some really simple intro tutorials that certainly grade 7 and 8 could
Easily
fly
do.
with very easily.
Yeah, I would bring up the mobile apps also. We have a lot of mobile apps that are iOS-based apps and Android-based apps. Some of them are more entertainment-esque, sort of like the character creator one that we have and some of the sculpting ones we have. But Autodesk has some engineering-based ones and some kind of physics and some.
They can
some
be a
really
good introduction to
and a
the.
lot of those are either free or very, very cheap. So they're super pedestrian and very, very accessible. Even like my 7-year-old plays with some of the sculpting ones on the iPad and loves them. So
Yep.
That's a great point, and that's a great place to start as well. And you can even eventually bring those models into Maya if you want to graduate your learning and take the second step. I mean, also I'm sure all of us can relate. Like when we were in high school, that's about the time when we started learning about the applications that we're designing or developing or showing off right now. Some of us, anyway. But
people.
on the other hand, we also have a lot of focus right now on trying to make Maya more accessible. I, for one, am not comfortable leaving Maya with a steep learning curve. It's definitely one of my personal ambitions as a designer to make not only modeling, just Maya in general, the UI, more accessible. So hopefully we get to that point, and that's the kind of stuff that we're focusing on these days.
Here we go. So we knew there had to be some questions around Maya LT eventually. So one of the questions here is, what is the next steps for Maya LT? Any chance for substance integration?
Do you want to talk about the extension features first, and then I'll just handle the other one? Because the one that they just
They went into a very specific thing there. Yeah.
Okay. The question is what's next for MyLT though, right? And
yeah,
then
but what's
the
next? I mean, maybe
secondary-
they don't. I don't think they know that. I mean, the extension just popped out, like, you know. So
Right.
yeah.
Okay, well that's a good point. So we just had an extension release for MyLT. I'll let Chris discuss the schedule around the plans for how we want to introduce new features there. But MyLT is a work in progress in the sense that we're always looking at what is of biggest use to that industry, that segment. MyLT is, if people aren't familiar with that, is a tool that's built off the Autodesk Maya framework there that is aimed specifically towards the indie mobile casual gamer or game development individual or company. So from there, we're always adding in new features that can add to that world. With our extension release, we've expanded our modeling toolkit offering, amongst some other things in there. I think the second part was to expand upon substance. So right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think
I don't know what I don't know. I'm going to leave it to you. I'm not going.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I think again, you know, the answer is, I mean, we've mobile gaming, you know, the person, one or two guys in a shop, 2 months to make a game. We did term licensing that was announced also. That's another big part of LT, being able to, you know, two guys break off, make a game, or two girls. So we want to be fast and furious. I mean, in the extension, we changed things like scripting. We went back on stuff. So we're also trying to be very responsive to this community because there was some reactions to the initial feature set. So we're going to be fast and furious with LT, maybe a little bit more risky and trying to do things new, UI things to, again, be more accessible to people that might not be 3D DCC people first. So expect a lot out of LT in the coming months and years.
Yeah, actually, if I just add one more thing on that, with the LT thing, you mentioned the terms. MyLT is also based around a different model for our customers. It's very flexible, and that Chris mentioned, whether you have it for a small team or an individual. We have this available on a monthly rental agreement, right? And you can go. It's very flexible. You can kind of pick your plan or build your plan as you go, and that's one of the beauty things that MyLT offers. It is specific to that mobile kind of casual indie game developer world. So we do have some specific targets where that goes into specific types of game engines or development protocols. So you can check it out online. We have a whole website set up around it, some tutorials there.
So we have another possible fanboy smackdown, which can happen in this question. What are the performance differences in Maya in Apple OS, Windows, and Linux? Be honest, guys, I can only see Apple comps there on the screen.
Craig is jealous of my computer. His is actually.
Let's pan over.
No.
This is not a Mac at all. It's what I like to call my Gears of War Lenovo ThinkPad Mac. It's nothing at all to do with Mac. I had a sticker and I stuck it on there, so it's not a Mac.
And on my side, I actually have a Mac laptop because I also run Smoke for Mac, which obviously only runs on a Smoke.
But he's actually running Windows.
And I'm actually currently running Windows as we speak.
So to answer the question, I think...
As am I.
As is it.
I'm running Linux.
I think the way to look at when you get to the Linux side, you know, so much of the performance is people tuning their own OS, and we don't even pretend to make big performance claims because you can go studio to studio. They're how they build out their pipelines and the drivers that they use and the performance of the hardware. It's really I think Apple, again, we the hardware's locked. The drivers are locked. We don't necessarily. So a lot of times maybe the performance is more predictable from in terms of, because you're basically these are the same computers. Mm-hmm. And then on Windows, again, it comes down to since it's such an open platform, and people, different graphics cards, the drivers are different. There's so many things that can affect the performance of a Windows box that I can say. We've been to places where Windows is screaming off the hook, and been to places where it's really slow, and it's just maybe someone installed the animated mouse cursor.
Exactly.
So
at the end of the day, I think what Chris is saying is it depends.
I think it depends on and so if you're looking at the answer to that question is if you probably want dependable performance and Mac is probably the one that you go out and say, well, I know what I'm going to get from computer to computer. If you're running a big facility, Linux is probably the better choice on film. And then on Windows, again, it comes down to you can get some awesome performance, but you can also get yourself dug in a hole pretty quick.
Then it's up to you.
I think it's preference and pipeline. Right? It depends on what you want, what environment you like to work within, right?
Like
So you're saying you're not judging anybody for?
I'm
any-
judging you right now, Chris.
Yeah.
Actually,
Well, I just want everyone to know I'm ready. I'm ready.
Oh.
Everyone, I'm telling the internet that I have a Windows phone, and it's
Oh,
okay.
interesting.
It's okay.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
it's okay.
Are you running Maya on that right now?
Yes.
And I would like to point out, like, for most of us, we prefer kind of running the Windows OS, if for no other reason than typically the drivers and newest graphics cards tend to come out fastest on that, so we can
Fair enough.
continuously be upgrading those things
Sure.
on a pretty rapid basis.
Yeah, I love my Mac laptop though.
Yeah, Daryl is an absolute Mac laptop fanboy, so
Love
There.
my, but I have to say I love my K6000 NVIDIA card on my workstation too. So can't get that in a new Mac tower. So there you go.
all right, so we're coming up on our last 10 minutes of our session here. Let's see what we've got sitting in the questions. Well, that's way too broad. Some people asking some very broad questions out there. Why don't we bring in a couple of the X-Gen questions that were asked previous, because I know as X-Gen's pretty new, and so there's a good chance people aren't that familiar with it. So one of the things here is, how many instances can X-Gen generate?
It can generate as many as your computer can handle. There are a couple things that you can do that are kind of cool with the instances. There's a level of detail, and I don't want to burn the last 10 minutes, but let me just walk you through this real fast, because this is a way
Burn
to
3 or
get
4.
more performance. Let's see here. If we set our project to something that's X-Gen-y-ish. Extension. So basically the way X-Gen works, obviously you create archive files, and if we go ahead and open up this hemlock tree here, when you export out your archive file, you can go ahead and give it an option to create levels of detail automatically, or you can manually create the levels of detail yourself. So if you say X-Gen export selected as archive, you can go in here and turn on the automatic level of detail reduction. So this runs polyreduce. So if you run a polyreduce command on your piece of geometry before you export, it's a good test, because I was trying to make lower res versions of this tree, and I would run the script, run the exporter, and I wasn't getting a low and a medium res, and it's because the polyreduce wasn't able to execute because there was non-manifold geometry on here. So it's a good test before you do this automatic reduction on your export, creating your archives, to make sure that that piece of geometry can actually be polyreduced first. So once I did that, it gave me the ability to create multiple Olympic files. It goes and creates a medium and a low, and then those will automatically load based on the camera distance. So I'll just open up another scene file really quickly here. This was the file that I used for the new feature video. So it's just a piece of terrain. On this piece of terrain, we're going to go ahead and we're going to instance some geometry, that tree. And that archive that we saved out earlier, looks like I'm running out of texture memory.
There's the downside of laptops.
So let me show you how to get around that. If you go to your viewport and go in here and clamp your texture memory, it will reload all those textures. Let's turn off our reload those textures. Yeah, so this is the problem with my awesome Mac laptop that I love so much. It only has 1 gigabyte of TRAM. Oh, that's painful. Well, pretend that it looks beautiful. Here, we'll do it like this. We'll take this piece of geometry, we'll create a new X-Gen description on that guy. So what we're going to do in this example is create a piece of geometry. So we're going to say custom geometry nodes. We're going to have it place those arbitrarily, randomly on that piece of geometry. So we'll go ahead and we'll create that. When we do that, now basically what we need to do is we need to go ahead and add in these trees. So the first thing that I always do is I drop that density value down, because I don't want to automatically add the archive in there and have it flood it with 400 million trees right away. So it's a good idea to drop that density and then bring it back up. At least that's the way I like to work. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that, and we'll add in a new archive. And if we jump up to this guy, and we grab, I don't have it in here. Let's see if we jump up to Obert D, Xgen, documents. I thought I had this saved out, but maybe I don't have it saved out. I don't have it saved out. Well, we'll just bring in the tree anyway, even though I didn't save it out. I thought I had it saved out previously. What it's going to do is it's going to bring in these trees, and you can adjust the overall low distance and medium distance, and that would go and adjust basic. Oh, it looks like my tree I saved out as spheres, which is great. Let's see if there's any. Oh yeah, there they are. So you can see as I'm adjusting that low distance and that high distance, it's trying to go through there and add in those extra archives. And in this example, unfortunately, I overwrote my tree with a bunch of spheres, but essentially
That was an earlier demo.
that was my work in progress testing demo. Basically what happens is, based on those low and medium distance parameters, you're going to adjust where that level of detail is going to kick in those instance pieces of geometry. So it gives your machine a fighting chance if you only have so much RAM in your rendering engine to not have to load in an archive that's 500,000 polys. You might want to have a 500,000 poly tree in the foreground, but a 20,000 polygon tree in the background. So it automatically creates those kind of levels of details, and then you use these sliders to adjust where that level of detail is going to kick in and decide on how close to the camera is it before it starts to drop down to the lower reses of detail. So it's an easy way to get a little bit more performance out of XGen by loading up levels of detail.
And again, the key is that this is a procedural. This is at the render time. So this is just to give you enough of a preview so that at render time,
the real stuff happens.
So to give you an example, between every sphere, you could say at render time, add 10,000 more trees, right? So again, this is the interactive preview in the viewport. There was a question about why does Sven's hair look like a rainbow in one of the new feature videos. Again, that being just these guides to give you an idea of the different parts that you're working with in the viewport.
Bring them up. I think
Yeah,
I'm
I
in
mean,
that
again,
directory.
maybe
Hold
that's a
on.
good example to show the difference. You're filling in the gaps
Sven.
between these artist tools, and then again at render time, you say, okay, now make this hair 10,000 times more dense. Maybe that's a better example.
Yeah, let's see what happens when we turn on hardware texture in this scene, since my TRAM seems to be panicking on me here. Oh, good, it loaded up. Super. Let's go ahead and turn on I think I have that sitting on the layer. It's been a while since I've looked at this file. So that's the guides that generate the hair. So the guides basically control where the instance geometry go. And I'm using a ptext file to color those guides just to give me a little bit more control to visually see what's going on with the hair. I like to segment it out. It kind of gives you a nice ability to see what's going on with that. And if we go ahead and we create our splines for this guy, our instance geometry, you can see that they're all colored the same as those guides. And the reason that's happening is basically the color of the output of those guys. You can see my primitive color is set to this expression that's saying get it from the guide color, and the guide color's set to this map that's basically grabbing svenheadscalp.ptext. So if I wanted to change this and have it being driven by a shader or just a simple slider value, just go ahead and have it not be driven by that expression, recalculate that description, and you'll see that it's now basically being driven by just a float value. But it could be tied to a mental ray shader. That mental ray shader could have different colors for tips and hairs and things like that. So it's very flexible, I guess, is the key.
When you're you want to do a solve for the hair, you don't want to solve 10 million hairs. So what you do is you send just these guides to nucleus to end hair. You solve those, and then it drives all of the hairs in between.
Yeah, it's really simple actually. It's you just say use animation, create hair system. You do that, goes through, hooks everything up. So now I've got end hairs that are ultimately driving those guides, which ultimately drive the instance geometry, which in this example are instance splines.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty elegant workflow, actually. And you'll also notice that I'm generating the geometry from a subset of his head. I go ahead and I create little kind of... XGen creates it over the whole piece of geometry. So it basically creates it all and then throws it away. So another way to get a little bit of extra speed out of XGen is, if you only want stuff in a certain area, create a duplicate of the piece of geometry, hide or delete all the faces in the areas that you don't need to grow hair from, and that'll give you another little speed improvement out of XGen. So you'll see I have a piece of geometry set up here for his eyebrows. This piece of geometry is, again, just kind of isolated to his scalp and his sideburns.
And the question, can XGen instances be adapted to the topology of an object? I think that's the answer right there. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And for those of you who've been paying attention to any of Daryl's new feature videos online, yes, he does make the characters spookily stare at you.
And you know what? I get grief. People give me a hard time. Like, why
I
are you
like
doing
that
that?
little feature because it's like, what is it?
Because
is it looking
I have
at me?
I'm staring at
Ben
this
looks like
guy.
he's aging on the spot here. He's getting gray
Well,
hair
look.
as we go. Yeah.
I work with very
seeing your future there,
early
Chris.
versions of the software, so it takes a lot of hours to get this stuff done because we're
Maybe
we're
we can do
working with alpha
maybe we can do a
software and-
live online poll. Who do you think Sven looks like? Sean or me? We're gonna see. We're gonna see. The internet will judge us.
Exactly. So we'll let that trickle in as we close out our session for today. Please feel free to continue commenting after we're done on it's Chris. It's totally Chris. So we're at the end of our session for today. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out. We really appreciate it. Expect we'll probably do more of these in future, so keep an eye out for those. We are having another round of all of these later on tonight, so we will all be dragging ourselves back in front of these tables starting at, I think, 9:30 or 9 o'clock tonight if you're in the Eastern time. This is basically so that everyone in Asia can watch without having to get up at 2 in the morning. So kudos to the people in Asia who will get a chance to watch that. If you feel like being here at 2 in the morning your time, come on back in. You can ask more questions if we didn't get to you. So again, thanks very much. Thanks, guys, for helping out. Oh, it looks like a young Sean. Oh, the gray hair looks like a young. Oh. That's just disappointing. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening.